as Mr. Khodorkovsky has been. We don't want to see that type of conduct. And if Russia would do that, if they would reform their systems, then I think we'd be a long way towards that type of integration into trade.
I thank my colleague from Maryland for an eloquent statement about the situation as regards Russia, and I thank him. And I can assure my colleague from Maryland that as we speak, this will provide, and this legislation which he has introduced will provide some encouragement to people who in Russia now, in some cases, have lost almost all hope because of the corruption of the judicial system as well as other aspects of the Russian nation. And we all know that no democracy can function without the rule of law. And if there's ever an example, two examples of the corruption of the rule of law, it is the case, the tragedy of Sergei Magnitsky and, of course, Mr. Khodorkovsky, who still languishes in prison, who in his words believes he has, by the extension of his prison sentence, may have been given a death sentence. So I thank my colleague from Maryland.
With my colleague yield just for one final comment, I think you're right on target as to what you have said, and I really appreciate you bringing this to the attention of our colleagues in the Senate. I want to respond to one other point, because I'm sure you've heard this, that Russian officials say, why are we dealing with the internal affairs of another country? I just want to remind the people of Russia, I want to remind my colleagues here, that Russia has signed on to the Helsinki Final Act. They did that in 1975. And they have agreed to the consensus document that was issued in Moscow in 1991 and reaffirmed just last year with the heads of state meeting in Astana, Kazakhstan. And I'm going to quote from that document just this past December. The participating states, which Russia is a participating state, emphasize that issues relating to human rights, fundamental freedoms, democracy, and the rule of law are international concerns, as respect for these rights and freedoms constitute one of the foundations of international order. They are categorically and irrevocably declare that the commitments undertaken in the field of the human dimension of the CSCE are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states. The United States is a participating state, and do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the state concerned.
That was a statement by the government of Russia.
That was a statement made by the 56 states of the OSCE at a meeting of the heads of state, which happens about every 10 years. It just happened to have happened last year. Russia participated in drafting this statement. Russia was there, signed on to it, said we agree on this. It's a reaffirmation as to what they signed on to in 1975 in Helsinki, that we acknowledge that it's of international interest and we have an obligation and right to question when a member state violates those basic human dimension requirements. Russia clearly has done that. We have not only the right but the obligation to raise that. And I just really wanted to underscore that to my colleagues. And so, Senator McCain, your comments on the floor are so much on point. I think people understand it. They understand the basic human aspect to this. But sometimes they ask, well, why should America be concerned? Do we have a legitimate right to question this? Russia signed a document that gives us the basic right to challenge this. So we're exercising the right that we have under law. I thank my colleague for yielding.
I thank the senator from Maryland. I hope that we would get very rapidly another 98 co-sponsors. I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I would request the suspension of the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. We are engaged in a very important debate on our budget over the last few days, and this debate will continue over the next several weeks and indeed for probably several months. It's not a new debate, and like past debates, at the heart of it are important programs for middle-income Americans like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And in some quarters, they're under attack. This doesn't have to be the case. In the 90s, Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate with the Democratic president were able to deal with this issue of deficit while preserving these programs and strengthening, indeed, in many cases, these programs. We were able to also provide the kind of economic growth that generated job creation, not just increased GDP or increased profits on Wall Street, but jobs on Main Street. Much of these efforts were, frankly, undone beginning in 2000 with tax cuts that did not, as advertised, produce the kind of private employment growth that were necessary for our economy, that shifted the burden to middle-income taxpayers while giving the wealthiest Americans extraordinary relief, and unfunded entitlement programs like Medicare Part D, and two major conflicts, none of which were paid for. And so now we once again face a situation where we have a significant deficit and we need to address it. President Obama has begun that process. He's begun it, I think, with the same commitment to maintaining Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, not without reforms and strengthening, but making sure that middle-income Americans and all Americans can have access to these vital programs. Now, we have taken significant steps in the long run to reform our health care system with the Affordable Care Act. We hope that, at least I hope, that that act is implemented efficiently and effectively so that we can begin to realize long-term savings to bend the proverbial cost increase curve of our health programs, not just our increase curve of our health programs, not just our federal health care programs, but our health care costs across the board that are borne by private insurers as well as public programs. In fact, ironically, it seems to me that one of the major accelerators of the Medicare program is the fact that so many Americans, about 40 million, don't have access to consistent quality health care now, and yet when they turn 65, they have, by right, access to a panoply of services. I've had discussions with doctors, and they will tell me, you know, they say several times a day to their new Medicare patients, I wish I saw you 10 years ago, because I don't have to apply the expensive diagnostic and remedial techniques. I could have done something much easier, much less costly if you had coverage and access. So that's one of the long-term efforts we are underway, but we have to do a lot more to go ahead and to deal with the issues before us. Now, we have seen Republican budget proposals, but frankly, I don't think they strengthen the middle class here in the United States, nor do they provide the kind of sensible investment that will lead to job increases and to provide the opportunities that are necessary for the succeeding generations of Americans. They are, I think, more dedicated to an ideological commitment to simply reduce taxes. And that's something that has to be tested and should be tested in the history of the last several years. That was the same argument that was made in 2001. That such tax cuts would generate huge growth in private employment, unleash huge economic forces here in the United States, and frankly, over the last 10 years, that has not been the case. So I think we have to be sensible I think we have to address the tax reform and tax reduction to middle-income Americans, not continually to favor the richest Americans when you come to tax proposals. And so much of what the Republican budget seems to do is continue what they started in 2001. Huge, huge relief for the wealthiest Americans, but increasingly putting the burden on middle Americans. In fact, it's been estimated that individuals under the Republican budget making over $1 million would receive an average tax cut of $125,000 a year. And that's a huge, huge cut relative to whatever a working middle-income American might receive. Now, one of the other aspects of this budget is the impact that it would have on Medicare. Medicare is central to every family in this country. In fact, look around at not just someone who's earning a wage hour by hour. Look at the small business person, the man or woman. Their retirement plan rests on the assumption that they will have access to Medicare. The Republican proposal, as I understand it, essentially ends that for individuals who are about 52 years old or younger. In the next 10-plus years or so, they're going to have to come up with a lot of money to pay for the Medicare that they assumed they would have received automatically when they retired at 65. And that's not just, again, the wage earner, the hourly worker who goes in there. That's the small business person whose post-retirement plan rests fundamentally on Medicare and then being able to buy a supplemental health care plan to that. So these are fundamental and, in fact, earth-shattering proposals in my view. Currently, seniors on traditional Medicare pay approximately $1,700 annually in premium. They're charged a limited amount for every hospital stay, have a reasonable deductible for every major procedure and treatment, and pay co-pays for services and prescription drugs. And they're even able to buy, as I alluded to, these Medigap plans, so they can supplement what Medicare provides with additional resources. And these supplemental plans are very affordable. On average, Medicare then spends about $11,760 on every senior. And that's just an average number, obviously. But this would all change, and it would inject a huge amount of uncertainty if the budget as proposed by the Republicans, that's still being debated by the Republicans, is still being supported in many cases by Republicans, is in any way enacted. Beginning in 2022, the proposal, if the Republican budget were enacted, would be that every senior who becomes eligible for what we now call Medicare would be given $8,000 to address all the health care needs and then sent to the marketplace to buy health care insurance. Now, I guess I've reached the point in my life where I can reflect and remember that as a youngster in the 1950s and certainly before 1965, there was in practically every one of my friends' homes, a grandparent that was there because they didn't have access to Medicare or Medicaid. They were in a hospital bed in the living room or in some other room. They were being cared for by typically the mother, who was also trying to care for youngsters like myself and my contemporaries. And the reason was, regardless of how much money you had, is that at some point insurance companies will not sell you insurance. You're old, you've had health experiences prior to that, you're a bad risk, and they're not in the business of insuring bad risk. That was, as much as anything, the genesis of Medicare, the recognition that the private health care market would not, regardless of your ability to pay, provide adequate coverage. And I think we've forgotten that. When the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan organization, looked at the proposal, they essentially concluded that with this $8,000 transfer to a senior in lieu of traditional Medicare, that the senior would be on the hook for additional $12,500 in health care costs. In fact, it would likely result in some seniors in not even getting health care insurance at all, not being able to afford it, or at some point particularly as they aged, getting to a point where no one would write them health care insurance because of the obvious health risks that they were. So this is a plan that I don't think that it comports with the reality of Americans that have already planned, and it's not just those who are over 52, but most Americans, to have access to Medicare, and also to the reality that what is proposed, an $8,000 transfer payment to an insurance company, would be inadequate to provide the kind of minimum coverage that we should be providing to our seniors. Now, we've had examples before where particular Republicans have proposed they have a new novel way to provide private health care insurance in lieu of traditional Medicare. When Medicare Advantage was established in 2003, seniors had the option of enrolling in private health insurance plans that were argued by the advocates as being cost-effective, would reduce costs, would put pressure on that public health care plan known as Medicare. 60,000 seniors in my state of Rhode Island enrolled. Private Medicare Advantage plans sell consumers on additional benefits and smaller copays. They went out very selectively, I suspect, recruiting seniors to come. I think recruiting in a way that they hope attracted the healthiest seniors, not the sickest seniors, because that would lower their cost. But however, in reality, most of these plans tended to cost more than traditional Medicare, as the smaller copays were largely offset by higher monthly premiums. And then, essentially, we were called upon repeatedly to provide more resources to a Medicare Advantage plan that was advertised initially as costing the government less. And I think we'll see that again as we go forward. So there are those that are still seriously proposing this Republican approach to Medicare. I think it will be a mistake. I think it would reduce access to health care coverage for seniors. I don't think the private market will jump up with the $8,000. I don't think you'll see that Congresses in the future will escalate the cost of these vouchers or transfers to private insurance companies in any way that would be commensurate to the real cost that seniors will face. And so as a result, I think this proposal will do serious harm to health care and to particularly to the middle-income Americans who, regardless of whether you're running a small business or working for an hourly wage, you will now face the prospect of the great uncertainty, the great unknown of no adequate health care coverage when you reach 65. We will go back in time to the period of my youth where, in fact, frankly, seniors did not have the kind of health care coverage they have today, and I believe the kind of health care coverage that they deserve. With respect to Medicaid, there are also proposals there. And the thought is that Medicaid is just a program for sort of poor Americans. But frankly, if you look at the statistics, there are 26,000 seniors in my state that are on Medicaid principally because of nursing home care. And we have to ask ourselves if these plans to provide block grants to states are enacted under the Republican proposal, whether those seniors still can maintain themselves in these nursing facilities, whether the cost will be so great on the states that they will be unable to keep up the level of effort, the level of support they are today. What seems to be inherent in all these proposals is not saving but shifting costs, not reforming the system to be more efficient and more effective, but simply shifting the cost onto seniors, shifting the cost onto particularly middle-income Americans. And so, Mr. President, I would urge, as we review these proposals, that we would not accept as we've been asked to, the kind of proposals that we've seen in the Republican budgets with respect to Medicare and Medicaid and many other things. And with that, Mr. President, I would conclude my remarks, and I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I want to thank the Senator from North Dakota for allowing me to go first. I'll be relatively brief. I've spoken on the floor on a number of occasions regarding my frustration about the Senate not spending enough time debating what I think is the key essential issue and the challenge facing us. Probably it's greater than any other challenge facing this body in a long, long time. My frustration only grew yesterday as we voted down 4 budget proposals. You know, it's been 757 days since we have passed a budget in this body, and so far no budget has been proposed this year out of the Budget Committee for us to examine and to look at. Now, the President offered up a budget earlier this year that would have spent more, taxed more. It was voted down last night in what I think probably was a historic vote. I didn't go back and check the records, but I'm not aware of any budget that's ever been presented by the executive branch to the Congress for approval that has not received at least some votes. The vote last evening was 97-0 against the President's budget. Now, it's almost unthinkable that an executive, a president, the executive branch would send a budget to the floor to be debated and voted on and not achieve one vote. I think what it tells us is obviously that budget was not designed to gain any kind of bipartisan support, obviously, but it didn't even obtain any partisan support. So it was not taken seriously at a time when we need to have in front of us a serious budget to debate and vote on. As I said, 757 days without a budget before us. You could not run a company, you cannot run a family, you can't run anything unless you know how much money is going to come in or approximate that and how you're going to budget against it so that you don't continue to go into hock and into debt. But that's the place where we were and are today. Now, Republicans did come forward with 3 proposals. Unfortunately, all of those were voted down also. You can argue that none of those 3 was sufficient to garner some support. All 3 received a significant level of support, particularly 2 of them, and yet not enough to pass this body. And so while the House has passed a budget and put before us a budget which we did vote on yesterday but unfortunately fell short, these are the only proposals which we've had in front of us in order to debate and vote on and set the structure for how we're going to spend the taxpayers' money. So here we are now approaching the month of June, 5 months into the current calendar year and 9 months into the fiscal year, and we still don't have a handle on how we're going to spend the taxpayers' money, what restrictions and restraints we're going to put on that, and how we might be able to go about and live within our means. This is the debate of this Congress that should be undertaken and has not been undertaken. Many of us have come to the floor in situations like this where we've asked for some time to speak, but the issue itself has not been put before us. Now, we know there are negotiations going on relative to how we put a plan in place that will help us get to the point where we can gain credibility in terms of our fiscal situation, but we're a long way from that. So I'm standing here once again to try to urge my colleagues to work together to try to achieve a result or at least a product on which we can have serious debate and determine the future of how we're going to spend the money that the taxpayers provide for us and do it in a responsible way. The most important factor that we have to address is the need, in my opinion, is the need to rein in Washington's excessive spending. The bottom line is government spending is out of control. The public understands this. And I think the response in 2010 to all of those of us that were running and all the elections across the country sent an unmistakable, long, loud, easily understood signal. We have too much government that we can't afford the government that we have, and we're adding too much government that continues to push us deeper and deeper into debt. Nearly $1.4 trillion of our spending requires us to borrow money so that we have that money, and then it puts us in a debt obligation, and clearly we need to rein in our spending. Now, part of all of this is discretionary spending, but it's only a fraction of what we have. It is something that we should debate. It's something that is part of the responsibility of the United States Congress and the Senate. But we're talking now about addressing a deficit of over $14 trillion, and we need to get serious over a little nick here and a little nick there and a little spending reduction there and look at the larger picture. We're staring down $14.3 trillion in debt. Credit ratings like Standard & Poor have downgraded the outlook for the United States debt with a negative warning. Economic growth is sputtering across the country. Unemployment remains high, and states are dipping deeper in the red. Zeroing in on billions, which is a lot of money, but it's only a minuscule amount of money compared to the trillions that we ought to be, that we are saddled with in debt and that we ought to be addressing. So it's time for Congress and this administration to stop the obvious, stop ignoring the obvious. The rapid growth of mandatory spending is endangering our financial future. I point to this chart here on my left. It simply points out the growth, the dramatic growth that has occurred and will continue to occur over the years in the future. And it doesn't take a mathematician, although the math is pretty simple. When you spend $3.7 trillion a year and take in $2.2 trillion, that leaves you in a big debt hole. But it doesn't take a mathematician or anybody with any sophistication in economics to understand that if we continue on the path that we're going, we are going to continue to see this line escalate. This red here is red ink. It's net interest that we will owe. What does that mean? That means that to continue borrowing in order to finance what we're doing, we're going to have to pay larger and larger rates of interest to the lenders because of the risk associated with our potential inability to pay back the loans that we have taken. And this flow of red ink, this red tide here, is, if we don't address this, it's going to make it difficult for Americans to buy cars, to pay their mortgages, to buy homes, to buy groceries. The prices of products will go higher because the interest rates that we're paying are higher. We're just running ourselves into a desperate situation. I think everyone understands that. I think it's been clear to the made clear to the American people. We don't have to spin this whole message here in order to convince the American people that we don't have a problem. We do have a problem. They understand that. That's what 2010 was all about, and we continue to go forward now here in 2011 without providing any basis of a real solution to assure the financial world and assure people that we're taking steps in order to address this. I've got a bunch of statistics here, Mr. President, but look, I think there is a consensus, and if anybody doesn't understand this, they haven't really looked at the problem. There is a consensus that we could tax Americans to death. We can cut discretionary spending in massive amounts, and we won't begin to address the problem that we have unless we address and put in place the massive amount of spending that has to go to the mandatory programs. Those things that we don't have control over in terms of budgeting, they simply are there, and if you're eligible, you get to draw from the program. Now, all of that is fine if you've got money to do it, but we're running out of money to pay those recipients who are continuing to receive benefits from these entitlement programs. And unless we address those, we are not going to solve the problem. Let's just take a couple of those, and let's just look at Medicare. Everybody says this is a political non-starter. If you dare talk about it or go there, you're going to get zinged in the next election. That it can be characterized as taking away benefits from the elderly when the plans that have been put forward do nothing of the sort. Nevertheless, it's important to understand that the dimensions of the problem that we're facing just from this one entitlement alone. Over the next 10 years, Medicare spending, just for this entitlement, this one entitlement, not Social Security, not Medicaid, Medicare alone is expected to double during the next 10 years. Just a few weeks ago, the Medicare trustees announced that the hospital trust fund would be exhausted by 2024, 5 years earlier than estimated in last year's report. Who knows what next year's report is going to tell us? Bottom line is this program is going to go broke. So failing to restructure Medicare jeopardizes the medical benefits of future Americans, elderly Americans, and future elderly Americans. And so rather than terminating Medicare, as has been charged, which is not true, rather than destroying Medicare, which has been charged but is not true, what we're trying to do is find a way to restructure it in a way that Medicare will be viable. It will stay solvent. Benefits will be there for future retirees. When Medicare was first enacted in 1967, the program cost $2.5 billion. At that time, Congress predicted that the program would cost $12 billion in 1990. That wasn't the case. Congress underestimated just a bit by $86 billion, which is more than just a bit. When you project that it's going to be $2.5 billion, when it starts at $2.5 billion and you project that it's going to be $12 billion and you ended up at 86, you have to start asking yourself some questions. Ooh, maybe we got this formula wrong. Maybe our assumptions didn't turn out just exactly as we thought they were going to do. Today, Medicare is roughly $494 billion, with approximately $89.3 trillion in total unfunded liabilities. These are staggering numbers. They're numbers beyond our ability to comprehend. Having said that, they're beyond our ability to deal with. There's just no possible way on earth, no matter how fast and how hard we grow, that we can possibly reach solvency in the Medicare program in the future. Why is that? Because after World War II, the soldiers came home, people had deferred having families, the so-called baby boom generation was born. And it has moved through our entire history over the last 60 years or so like a pig moves through a python. Early on, there was a rush to provide housing for soldiers and their families. There was a massive infusion of money into baby cribs and the need for hospitals and doctors and nurses that would deliver children. And a few years later, all of a sudden, we had to start building a massive number of new elementary schools. As this baby boom has moved through their lifespan, we have seen dramatic impacts on the economy, many of them positive. But the colleges that had to be expanded and built, and universities and training facilities, the education that had to be provided, the employment that needed to be provided. All of this has had a dramatic impact on our economy. We have known for decades that eventually this pig moving through the python was going to reach the point of retirement. And when it reached the point of retirement, it was going to have an enormous impact on our finances. But instead of anticipating this coming and putting in place structural plans that would accommodate the needs, the legitimate needs of those for retirement income and benefits, we have instead ignored this reality. We have pushed it down the road. Nobody wanted to touch it. Election after election after election, it was said, we better postpone that for the next election because it's just too hot to deal with now. Well, it's all coming undone. We're at the point almost of no return. And so the proposals that have been put forward, you may not agree with every portion of it. I don't agree with every portion of these proposals. But the House brought to us a budget plan that was, you have to give Paul Ryan a great deal of credit for the extraordinary amount of effort and work he put into it. Maybe you don't like all of it, but at least it's a plan to debate, modify, adjust, but it's something that gives us an opportunity to start down the path of paying off our debt, of maintaining solvency for the Medicare program and other entitlement programs, and that's what we ought to be debating instead of simply saying we're into another new cycle of gotcha. You've touched the third rail. You've made the decision to put Medicare in play, and we're going to take it to the public and tell them you're going to take away their health care benefits when they retire. It's just the opposite is true. We're trying to save those health care benefits for those who are retiring. We're trying to look at ways that we can structure the program so it doesn't not only break Medicare, but break our entire economy. Today, the average person is living into their 70s, and the average woman is living into their 80s and even 90s. And as a result, more elderly Americans are on Medicare than originally anticipated. Federal government can no longer continue with business as usual. It's time for some honesty with the American people. Washington is promising to deliver benefits it can't afford. We can no longer nickel and dime doctors and hospitals and force them to pay for the care Washington has promised elderly Americans. More and more doctors are having to turn away Medicare patients. The American Medical Association revealed that 17% of more than 9,000 doctors surveyed are forced to limit the number of Medicare patients they accept. And among primary care physicians, this rate is 31%. Why? Because we can't reimburse. We don't have the money to reimburse them for the costs that it takes to provide that care. The American Osteopathic Association said that 15% of its members refuse Medicare and 19% decline to accept new Medicare patients. Physicians and hospitals in my home state of Indiana are feeling the pain from the Congress inaction as well. Hospitals like Deaconess Clinic in Evansville, Indiana, say 1/3 of their patients are on Medicare. When doctors or hospitals are not receiving the necessary compensation for services conducted on 1/3 of its patients, it has a devastating impact on their businesses. If we don't reform Medicare, we lose Medicare. Let me repeat that. If we don't take steps to reform Medicare, we lose Medicare. If we don't restructure the program, more patients will lose the care that they desperately need. Mr. President, a very prominent figure, a leader of this country, made this statement. Almost all of the long-term deficit and debt that we face relates to the exploding costs of Medicare and Medicaid. Almost all of it, he said. That is the single biggest driver of our federal debt. And if we don't get control over that, we can't get control over our federal budget. That defines, in a very basic statement, exactly the challenge that's before us. It tells us, it gives us the warning that we need to heed, and it should spur us into action. Let me repeat that. Almost all of the long-term deficit and debt that we face relates to the exploding costs of Medicare and Medicaid. Almost all of it. That is the single biggest driver of our federal debt. And if we don't get control over that, we can't get control over our federal budget. That is a statement made by President Barack Obama. It's not made by a Republican. It's not made by an editorial piece in the Wall Street Journal. It's not made by a Tea Party leader or advocate. It's not made by any Republican. It is made by our current president. Our president has said we cannot sustain what we're doing and we have to get at it or it's going to take down our whole budget. Why in the world, having said that, and I think it's true, it's been backed by analysts that have looked at this whole situation, left, right, non-political, political, whatever, why are we here not going forward with addressing this very question? That's what the people sent us here to do in 2010. That's what they're asking us to do now, and yet we're acting as if this statement by the President of the United States has nothing to do with what we need to do, that we can simply ignore this and go forward and just cut a little here and cut a little there, but we can't touch the entitlement. We can't touch Medicare. Oh, papers are full today of headlines saying the New York special congressional race. That was because the people have been scared into, I didn't say scared, that's because the people said, don't cut our Medicare. What it should have said is those people who are saying don't cut our Medicare are basically saying keep mine going until this thing runs out. I'm not sure I can, I'm afraid I might live too long and then I won't have benefits at the end. But for sure our kids won't have it. For sure our grandchildren won't have it. Because at its current rate, as the President of the United States has acknowledged, it's unsustainable. So we have two options here. We can continue with the status quo. We can quibble over how much to cut from our discretionary spending, that which we have control of, and continue ignoring the entitlement programs, or we can make a commitment and have the political will to fulfill that commitment by saving those programs through some sound restructuring. This does not mean that current recipients of Medicare are going to be kneecapped or have their benefits dropped. This does not mean even those nearing retirement are going to face that prospect. What it does mean is that if we don't put reforms, the structural reforms in now to address the future problems, then we're going to lose the whole program. The greatest threat to Medicare is doing nothing. If we do nothing, not only will Medicare collapse, but so will our fiscal house. Mr. President, a former president, another Democrat, Bill Clinton, said, and it's in the papers today, he urging his fellow Democrats to, quote, don't tippy-toe around on Medicare. And I continue that quote. He said the program is part of a whole health care system that has a toxic effect on inflation. He went on to say, we've got to deal with these things. Mr. President, I'm here not to criticize the Democrats for putting us in this situation. I think we all bear some responsibility. The country does not want us to point fingers at each other. They don't want us to use this as a political advantage for the 2012 election. They want us to do the right thing that they all know needs to be done. And I believe they'll reward us and recognize us for at least having the courage to step forward and address a real problem that everyone now, I think, understands and recognizes. So whether it's the Paul Ryan plan coming out of the House, whether it's a Democrat budget plan coming out of the Budget Committee, whether it's some other plan coming out between the negotiations that are going on or should go on between the executive branch and the congressional branch, this is something that we have got to do. We have just simply got to put aside our partisanship and concerns and worry about the 2012 elections and simply say we have to rise above politics, as we did in 1983 when we restructured Social Security, a Republican president, a Democrat House leader, members of the Democrat committee, congressional committee and Senate committee, the political people stood together and said this rises above the election. It's too important not to address, to transcend it. Can we just take this one issue and say, let's take this out of politics. Let's stand together as Republicans and Democrats and along with the President and do what's right for the country. Now, the bottom line is, no matter what we do here, if the President doesn't support us in this effort, it's not going to succeed. He has the veto pen, and he has the ability to lead or not lead. So I guess as I have before, I'm calling on the President to basically say this important issue can only be successful, Mr. President, if you will engage and you will lead us and you will be part of this effort to solve a problem that affects every living American and those to be born and participate in this country. It dramatically affects our future much sooner, I believe, than any of us think. It affects our economy and our ability to grow. All of this has to be coupled with growth policies. We can't cut our way out of all this. We can help restructure, we can help make cuts where necessary, and we can help our economy to grow by putting policies in place that will stimulate the economy. That combination, put together in a package, is what we need to support. And I'm just hoping that we will put politics aside for this one issue, which is so important to the future of our country. Mr. President, I probably said more than I need to say at this particular point in time. I appreciate the opportunity. I again thank the Senator from North Dakota for agreeing to let me go forward here. As Chairman of the Budget Committee, I mean, I know he's fully cognizant and aware of these issues and is working to try to address them also. I just hope that we can continue to work together to find a solution to this very, very urgent problem. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Dakota.
I want to thank the Senator from Indiana for his thoughtful presentation. You know, there are parts of it with which I disagree, but the overall theme of what he has said is undeniably true. Our country, I believe, is in deep trouble. At the end of this year, we will have a debt that is 100% of the gross domestic product of the United States. We've had two of the leading economists in this country tell us, after a review of 200 years of economic history, that when a country reaches a gross debt of more than 90% of its GDP, its future economic prospects are diminished. And that's where we are. So I agree with the Senator from Indiana that this is the time. We must find a way to come together to craft a plan that deals with this debt threat. And 5 years ago, the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, Senator Gregg, and I came up with this concept of a commission. That commission was in place last year, came up with a recommendation to reduce the debt $4 trillion over the next 10 years, and 11 of 18 commissioners supported it. Senator Gregg, the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, and I both supported it. We had 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 1 independent. The only bipartisan plan that's emerged from anywhere. But we needed 14 of 18 to agree for it to come to a vote in Congress. Mr. President, there are many parts of that plan I didn't like. I would have gone further than that plan. I proposed to the Commission we have a $6 trillion plan of debt reduction because that would have balanced, we could balance the budget in 10 years with that kind of plan. But it was a step in the right direction. It was a big step in the right direction, and so I supported it along with the other 10 commissioners who did. Mr. President, I just want to say to the Senator from Indiana, I respect the presentation that he just made because it, in larger terms, says what has to be said. We all have to be truth tellers. However uncomfortable the truth is, we have to be truth tellers. I believe the truth is when the revenue is the lowest it has been in 60 years as a share of GDP, and spending is the highest it has been in 60 years as a share of GDP, that we've got to work both sides of the equation. We are going to have to cut spending. I believe we're going to have to raise revenue. None of it is very popular. If you ask the American people, they will say to you, well, yes, get the deficit and debt under control, but don't touch Social Security. Don't touch Medicare. Don't touch defense. Don't, by the way, just those 3 are 80% of federal spending. If you add up
all the mandatory programs, you add up defense, that's 80% of federal spending. And if you ask the American people, they say don't touch any of them. And the revenue side of the equation, they say don't touch that. You know what's left? 20% of federal spending. And if you start asking them questions about the elements of that 20%, they reject every one except one, foreign aid. They say, yes, cut foreign aid. A majority supports that. The problem is that's 1% of the budget. Here we are, we're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. You can eliminate all foreign aid. It does not make a material difference. The other thing the American people support by a majority, the only other thing, is taxing the wealthy. Let me just say, I believe the wealthy are going to have to pay somewhat more. But that won't solve our problem. Because to solve the problem, you'd have to have a top rate of 70 to 80% on corporations and individuals. What would that do to the competitive position of the United States? So I believe we all are going to have to be truth tellers. Before we're done, we're going to have to find a way to come together. I was part of that effort on the Commission. I was part of that effort in this group of 6. It's now a group of 5 because one of our members left. And there's this other effort underway that's a leadership effort with the White House involved. At the end of the day, the White House has to be at the table. What Senator Gregg and I had recommended was that the Secretary of the Treasury be the chairman of the Commission and the head of OMB be one of the 18 members. But, you know, that wasn't adopted by the Congress. We got 53 votes in the United States Senate, but 53 votes doesn't pass things around here. You got to have 60. You got to have a supermajority. So here we are. Let me just say that, again, I thank the Senator for his thoughtful presentation, because that's what it's going to take. I mean, we're going to have to be brave. We're going to have to show some political courage here to do what's right for our country. And I appreciate the Senator from Indiana's thoughtful remarks. Let me just make a brief review in response to some of what I've heard this morning, because I've heard some things that I strenuously disagree with that I think require a response. The thing we all agree on is we're on an unsustainable path. We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar. That cannot be continued. As I indicated earlier, this is a 60-year look at the spending and revenue of the United States. You can see the spending line is the red line, the green line is the revenue line, and the spending of the United States as a share of national income is the highest it's been in 60 years. The revenue is the lowest it has been in 60 years. Now, some of our colleagues say it's just a spending problem. I just factually reject that. I mean, the facts show it's not just a spending problem, although clearly we do have a spending problem. When spending is the highest it's been in 60 years, clearly you got a spending problem. But as this chart reveals, revenue is the lowest it's been in 60 years. So clearly we've got a revenue problem as well. Now, yesterday we voted on the package that came from the House of Representatives. The package that came from the House Budget Committee was passed by the House of Representatives. And here again this morning, even though that package was defeated overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis here yesterday, we had colleagues come and talk about what a great package it was. I don't believe it was a great package. I think it's a terrible package. And here's why. And now I'm quoting former economic advisor to President Reagan. President Reagan's, one of his economic advisors, Mr. Bartlett, said about the House Republican plan the following: distributionally, the Ryan plan is a monstrosity. The rich would receive huge tax cuts while the social safety net would be shredded to pay for them. Even as an opening bid to begin budget negotiations with the Democrats, the Ryan plan cannot be taken seriously. It is less of a wish list than a fairy tale, utterly disconnected from the real world, backed up by make-believe numbers and unreasonable assumptions. Ryan's plan isn't even an act of courage, it's just pandering to the Tea Party. A real act of courage would have been for him to admit, as all serious budget analysts know, that revenues will have to rise well above 19% of GDP to stabilize the debt. Now, this is a former economic advisor to President Reagan commenting on the House Republican plan that we rejected on a bipartisan basis here yesterday. Why does he say it's a monstrosity? Well, he says it because even though revenue is the lowest it's been in 60 years, the first thing the Republican budget from the House did was cut taxes further. An overwhelming tax cut for the wealthiest among us, after they've already enjoyed very significant tax reductions over the last decade. In fact, the plan that came from the Republican plan from the House would have given those who have over $1 million of income a year, on average, a tax cut of over $192,000. For those who are as fortunate as to earn over $10 million a year, the plan that they sent over here would have given them, on average, a tax cut of $1,450,000. Now, that's a fact. That's just a fact. Does that make any sense at all when the revenue of this country is the lowest it's been in 60 years? The first thing you do is dig the hole deeper? Give another $1 trillion of tax cuts going to the wealthiest among us? It makes no sense. It didn't end there, because the plan from the House also would permit the scam that is occurring to continue. And the scam I'm referring to relates to this little building down in the Cayman Islands, Udland House. This little 5-story building down in the Cayman Islands claims to be the home of 18,857 companies. Really? 18,000 companies are doing business out of this little 5-story building down in the Cayman Islands? Please. 18,000 companies aren't doing business out of this little 5-story building down in the Cayman Islands. The only business that's going on is monkey business. And the monkey business that's going on is avoiding the taxes that they legitimately owe to the United States. You wonder why big companies making billions of dollars a year can announce they paid no taxes to the United States? None. It's because they're operating out of Udland House down in the Cayman Islands, where there are no taxes, and they show the profits of their companies down in the Cayman Islands. When I was tax commissioner of my state, I found a company that reported all of their earnings down in the Cayman Islands. They did business all across the country, but amazingly enough, none of those companies showed any profits in the United States. They showed all their profits in the Cayman Islands, where, happily, there are no taxes. Now, look, the Republican budget plan said, that's fine, keep doing it. That's not fine. It's not fair. We know from our own permanent Committee on Investigations here in the United States Senate that these offshore tax havens are proliferating. Here's the quote from our Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Experts have estimated the total loss to the Treasury from offshore tax evasion alone approaches $100 billion a year, including $40 to $70 billion from individuals and another $30 billion from corporations engaging in offshore tax evasion. Abusive tax shelters add tens of billions of dollars more. Mr. President, the Republican plan from the House says, no problem, keep on doing it. In fact, we'll go you one more. We'll give you more tax cuts for the wealthiest among us. I tell you, that plan cannot stand scrutiny. And at the same time, It says, you know, because we've got the lowest revenue in 60 years, and because we're going to give even more tax preferences, more tax credits, more tax schemes to the wealthiest among us, we're not going to be able to keep Medicare. I've heard colleagues say that these draconian cuts to Medicare that are in the House plan are a way of saving Medicare. You don't save Medicare by destroying it. That's what the House plan does, make no mistake. It ends Medicare as we know it. Why do I say that? Well, let me just show you what it does. Right now, under traditional Medicare, the individual pays 25% of their health care costs. That's how it works today. You pay about 25%. A senior citizen eligible for Medicare pays about 25% of their costs. Under the House Republican budget plan that they passed and sent the Senate, that we defeated yesterday by a bipartisan vote, they would increase what the individual pays from 25% to 68%, and they claim they're saving Medicare. Doesn't look to me like they're saving it. Looks to me like they're completely undoing it. And when you add it all up, what is most striking is that the House Republican plan, although it gives massive tax cuts to the wealthiest among us, another $1 trillion of tax cuts, even though it shreds Medicare and completely undermines Medicaid, would mean another 34 million people don't have health care coverage in this country because they completely undo the coverage for health care passed last year. So 34 million people are not going to have health care as a result of their plan. Even with all of that, and the other dramatic cuts, by the way, they cut support for energy programs to reduce our dependence on foreign energy. They cut that 57%. They cut education almost 20%. Even after all that, you'd think, well, at least they got the debt under control. No. Amazingly enough, their plan, according to their own numbers, would add $8 trillion to the debt. Wow. They shred Medicare. They cut education dramatically. They cut almost 60% of the funding for energy to reduce our dependence on foreign energy. They cut that 57%, and they still add $8 trillion to the debt. Wow. That's a good plan? I don't think so. I don't think that's a plan that can stand much scrutiny. Mr. President, we also heard a lot of complaints from the other side that we've not gone to markup on the budget here in the Senate. That's true. And the reason we haven't is because something is going on in this town that's very unusual. There are high-level, bipartisan talks going on with the White House on what the budget plan should be to deal with our debt. This is something I've encouraged for years. I've called repeatedly this year for a summit to deal with our debt, to get a plan in place to cut spending and, yes, to raise revenue, hopefully without raising taxes, but by eliminating tax expenditures, tax loopholes, this kind of scam we've just talked about, offshore tax havens and abusive tax shelters. And, Mr. President, that bipartisan leadership effort that is underway deserves a chance to succeed. If they reach a conclusion, they will need a budget resolution. They will need us to have a markup in the Budget Committee to implement their plan. Some don't want to wait. They don't want a bipartisan agreement. But we simply must have a bipartisan agreement if there is to be any chance for success. The House is controlled by the Republicans. The Senate is controlled by the Democrats. There is a Democrat in the White House. The only possible way that a plan is actually passed into law and implemented is if we work together. I did it for all of last year on the President's Commission. I've done it 4 months of this year with 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, spending hundreds of hours trying to come up with a bipartisan plan here to implement the recommendations of the Commission. So I don't take a back seat to anybody with respect to being serious about trying to get a plan to get our debt under control, because it's a fundamental threat to the economic security of the United States. But here's what the Republican leader himself said about the effort that is underway, the bipartisan leadership effort. The discussions that can lead to a result between now and August are the talks being led by Vice President Biden. That's a process that could lead to a result, a measurable result. And in that meeting is the only Democrat who can sign a bill into law. In fact, the only American out of 307 million of us who can sign a bill into law. He is in those discussions. That will lead to a result. That is why we have not gone to a budget markup, because we have the patience to wait for the outcome of these bipartisan leadership talks. Top Republicans are represented in the Senate. Top Republicans in the House are represented, as are the Democrats in the Senate and the House, led by the White House. Mr. President, the Republican leader said this as well about the talks. We now have the most important Democrat in America at the table. That's important. He is the only one of the 307 million of us who can actually sign a bill into law. And I think that's a step in the right direction. And the Biden group is the group that can actually reach a decision on a bipartisan basis. And if it reaches a decision, obviously, we'll be recommending it to our members. Mr. President, that is the point. Why would we go to a partisan budget markup and refuse to wait for the leadership negotiation that is underway to succeed, when we know if they do succeed, in all likelihood, they will need us to do a budget markup to implement what they decide? Mr. President, I have the patience. I've spent 5 years working first with Senator Gregg, the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, then with all 18 members of the Fiscal Commission, now with a group of 6, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, trying to put together a plan to implement what the Commission recommended, to get our debt, to see if the combined leadership of this country, Republican and Democrat, working with the President of the United States, can come up with a plan to get our debt under control. We should all have that patience. We should all hope that they succeed. But we're not just going to be sitting and waiting. While we're hoping for a successful outcome, this senator will continue to work with Republicans and Democrats to come up with a bipartisan plan to meet our debt threat. All of us have that obligation. All of us have that responsibility. I thank the chair and yield the floor.
The senator from Iowa.